the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast, hosted by 360 Energy. In today's episode, we will be addressing the serious topic of climate change. Some key points discussed today are the effects of greenhouse gas emissions, the impacts this could have to your supply chain, including climate change into your business plans, and more. These topics are meant to assist and get you thinking about your corporation's climate change plan. Now on to the episode. Welcome back, Dave and John. Today we will be getting into a pressing issue the entire world is affected by, climate change. We have quite a few heavy-hitting questions today, with some inspired by a climate change briefing for directors developed by the CPA. Now, the most important question is, are you two feeling well prepared?
We are. Well, I'm ready. John, are you ready?
Oh yes, bring it on.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So straight into a heavy hitter. Currently, climate change is showing its impact all over the world, with landslides in India, floods in Germany, wildfires in the US and Canada. Reading the news these last couple weeks has been disheartening, to say the least. If we maintain the GHGs we're emitting right now, what will happen? What happens if we keep emitting more? And finally, if we are able to reduce emissions, what might the climate look like?
Well, you said it was a big question, and it really is. I think there's a few things we've got to say around that, and I think you're right about reading the news. I just picked up in my news feed that they're concerned about the impact of heat at the Olympics, and thinking that is yet another manifestation of climate change. So I think a thing to start with is we've had a history of people denying climate change. I think where we are now, it's the wake up and smell the coffee moment, because, we are actually experiencing it. Although some of the deniers go, yes, this is all part of a natural cycle. But I think we've got to nail this one. What is it? 95% of scientists who've published papers on the issue all agree that what we're doing as a human race is having a significant impact on the climate and is creating climate change. So do we want to go with the majority of scientific opinion, or be the people that are arguing for the it's not really happening one? I think something I'm going to say on that I think is relevant. If we accept it's happening and we address it and we do something about it, what's the worst that can happen? We have spent some money maybe on cost-effective projects and done something. If we sit there and do nothing, what's the worst that can happen? Well, climate change could get worse. So, must get back to your question. If we maintain the GHGs we're emitting right now, what will happen? I think the consensus is that climate will change, and what's more concerning rather than is it just going to get warmer or whatever, is we're going to start hitting massive instabilities, and I think what they would mathematically perhaps refer to as chaotic circumstances, where we don't know what's happening next. I can remember the first time I came over to Canada, you could pretty much predict when the snow was going to start, and you put your winter tyres on. Can you now? No, that's moving. So I think things are moving now. What will happen if we emit more? Well, some people go, well, that's not possible, but I don't know. When you're actually looking at some of the things that are going on, lockdown doesn't appear to have reduced emissions at the level that people thought the reduced activity might. We're getting economic bounce back. Yeah, it's possible we could emit more. It depends with people actually following through on their pledges. But okay, so what happens if we get more? I guess the point of catastrophe, for want of a better word, will come sooner, and we may have more frequent extreme weather. We're not about saving the planet, because some people use that expression, we want to save the planet. No, we want to save our lifestyle on this planet. This planet's going to continue quite happily without us. And if we can reduce emissions, what might the climate look like? Well, I think a really good point there is we're not suddenly going to get a change. The climate is like a massive super tanker that's ploughing through the water, and even if we shut the engines off and put them into reverse, it's going to carry on for some time. Carbon dioxide typically exists in the atmosphere for 100 years. So, we're reaping the benefits, or not, of carbon dioxide that was emitted 100 years ago. What we can hope is that if we do reduce emissions, that the instability of the weather will flatten out, we will adapt to it, and life, not quite as we know it, but life for the human race can continue in a way that we would like. So that's my take on it. Dave?
Yeah, I think effectively what we're seeing is actually informing or getting customers to think that like they've never had before. So as John said, there in 2008 there was a movement to actually do some work in this area. At least we were involved, and then some political things changed, and it was taken off the radar screen. You can't take it off the radar screen now. It's in media, it's all over, and not only on media, it's actually impacting businesses. It's actually impacting their supply chain. So you can't deny that anymore. You have to execute. So I ask this question frequently, people of many ages, including my daughters, like, well, what do you think is going to happen with climate change? Like, are you concerned about this? And so it's really interesting. Doesn't matter what age it is. Certain people have different perspectives. Some still don't even worry about that because they're worried about whatever they're doing. So I think we're going to act, and we have to act because there's no other choices. So it's right in front of us. We're all used to watching TV or on our computers, but we see it every day. If we don't do something, we're idiots. That's just so Listen, I'm interested in your perspective because you deal with, your age group, your perspective with some of the people that you know.
I think what's interesting is growing up for me, science has always been there. Whereas when you're talking to older generations, maybe these type of things were never taught in school. For us, climate change has always kind of been a thing. I remember even being a kid with the really bad winters and, my parents kind of saying, oh, that didn't really happen a couple years back. So climate change for us is just kind of been part of us growing up. I think we're more in tune with it and we're more aware of it. And I think it's more of a reality for us as well, because in 20 years, we're still going to be in our early 40s, right? So
Yep.
there's a lot of life left to live. So I think it makes it more real for us in that sense. And I think, again, it's always been something that we've learned about and we've been involved in. I think that kind of shows the younger generation, it kind of takes it more seriously because it's part of our future. And it's for sure going to be an issue in the next, 20, 30 years. It's something that we're always going to have to work at to be better at.
I'm really hopeful just because of what you've just stated. And you're absolutely right. Perhaps people of the older generation, which maybe encompass myself and John, may not get it or don't want to get it. But I'm really hopeful because of your generation and people older and younger, that they will act and it will happen and it's going to happen. The sooner we can get more people thinking that way and actually being involved and influenced in decision makings, the faster we'll actually be able to do this. So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, and this leads me to my next question. So, given the importance of doing something about this now, I think we should address how an organization contributes to climate change. Is there a typical percentage of a company's carbon emissions that comes from, let's say, the use of energy?
Yeah, so it depends on the industry. We work with chemical, cement, pulp and paper, food industry. It really depends, but we use a benchmark of that 80% of the carbon will come from the amount of energy that you use in your business. That can vary depending on the organization, but it's significant. Energy usage has a major impact on the carbon footprint. That's why we really emphasize when we're dealing with sustainability people. We understand all the parameters that they have to look at, but you should have a focus and a lens on energy because that will, I think, bring the biggest bang for the buck on that one.
Yeah, I think, and if you're looking at that, you might be saying, so where's the other 20% come from? And you've got to look at things, for example, refrigeration gases, leakage of those, that adds part to your GHG emissions. If you're accounting for it fully, garbage that you send to waste that goes to landfill that rots down, that ends up emitting methane, and that adds to your footprint. And so there are other aspects there. But if you look in general, if we want to, if we're going to hit the big thing to hit to do something about climate change is reducing carbon emissions, or that whole family of carbon emissions. And the best thing, the biggest, most obvious thing to hit is energy. And we would say this, and one of the bonuses is if you use less energy, the chances are you're spending less money. So it can be a win-win in that sense.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about energy, so certainly you're talking about electricity. So electricity in some jurisdictions, it's made from, hydraulic, it could be nuclear, it could be renewables, but there's a lot of electrical generation that in different jurisdictions in North America, well, even in Europe, that rely on coal,
Yes.
natural gas. So you really need to understand which jurisdiction you're in and how it impacts. But then natural gas is a big, or oil is used for other parts of the organization, whether it's for heating, space heating, or whether it's for ovens or gas-fired ovens of some sort. So you have to really look at those things, and that's why when we use the 80%.
Yeah, I suppose I was just thinking the other thing we should add on, and it comes from our sort of portfolio of work that we do, is that certain industries emit carbon dioxide as part of their process. And the classic example of that is cement. It's not possible to make cement without releasing CO2, although that's when we start looking at technologies like carbon capture and storage, or capturing that carbon and doing something else with it. But again, if you're looking at a cement company, the biggest thing you do first of all is to do something about the energy you're using. You then, as you work through the opportunities, you then get down to, well, what do we do about the process emission?
If climate change continues with the trend we are currently seeing, what are risks it poses to companies in regard to supply chain and location?
Wow, that we're dealing with customers that are already facing that type of issue. So it's interesting in the produce side. A lot of people have been dependent on California for produce because of the climate they've had in the past. But now there can be a shortage of water, and so what's happening is that vertical farms are now popping up in northeastern United States, and some production is happening in Canada because there's availability of water. So supply chain is adjusting and changing, and it will have to. And that's like a sort of a long-term trend that's actually happening, and that's why people have to be engaged in thinking about this. But the other thing that we're finding, and we work with the customers in California, if they have fires, there's interruptions because they can't get power or they shut off the power. So customers have to start thinking, okay, what do I need to do if I'm staying in a certain jurisdiction and there's volatility or interruptions? What do I need to do to mitigate that risk? Like, can I get backup generation? Can I put my own generation, whether it's renewables or things? So all the things that people never ever thought about before, they now have to start thinking about. And that's, quite frankly, because it's different and they've never thought about it. It's hard work. Because it's hard work, a lot of people don't want to deal with it. So, there's a lot of implications to customers who they're supplying to, that they have to deliver in a timely fashion. What are they going to do to actually overcome and ensure that when there is interruptions, how they can deal with that? And then long-term trends, okay, if there's water issues, where are you going to go and how are you going to fix it? So there's multiple things that need to be factored, and I think it's only now starting to be thought of. One last thing I want to give you a heads up. One of the customers that we work with is in the metal industry. They now have 7 different customers asking them to report on what are they doing on carbon, on energy, and on water security. That's going to be the new norm. So you'll have to start thinking this way going forward, and that's a form of risk mitigation.
Yeah, I think as well. I think with taking on the supply chain issue, I think we've got to realise sometimes we're a bit insular about what our supply chains are, but supply chains are now global, and that makes a big thing. I'm not sure how it impacted North America, but if you think a while back, we had somebody who did a bit of a bad maneuver with a ship in the Suez Canal. They managed to turn it 90 degrees and block the Suez Canal. And there were ripples back through the supply chain for quite some time after that. And a thing we're experiencing here in the UK is we are currently having some supply chain disruptions in food supply and retail supply. This could get political because there are suggestions of, is it because we've left Europe and the Brexit problem? There's also the issue that we have a shortage of truck drivers because they haven't been able to we've lost them from Europe, and also new qualifiers haven't been able to get their driving licenses. But where I'm going with this is we are actually having people experiencing and seeing empty shelves in parts of the supermarket. And this is not because of a panic buy. Now, that just gives us a little foresight to what might happen if we start having catastrophic events occurring around the world. I mean, I'd be interested to know how much of the retail products that come into North America originate in China, and how do they get there? They get there by sea. Well, just think of the issues that could occur there.
And then there's also pending economic implications where jurisdictions, whether it's the UK, United States, Canada, are now talking about some type of carbon tariff. If the product is produced in a certain jurisdiction that uses a lot of carbon-based fuels, that they'll be taxed. So the implications of if you're buying a product in a jurisdiction that's heavily carbonated, such as China, that there could be additional cost added when it's brought into North America. So that's a cost implication that's going to be impacted customers as well. So there's a lot of pieces that need to be considered.
Yeah, and if you go back to the location aspect, I think this is where we have to start looking at broader issues. Even though we're energy specialists, but we have to say there are broader issues that have to be looked at because of what we're here. And I think that one of the words that I would throw out about location is resilience. How resilient is your location? Dave mentioned earlier about possible outages of power, but what about flash flooding? I mean, you're talking about the news earlier, Lysandra. We've had mass transit stations in London flooded because of flash flooding, and scientists and observers are reporting that's going to be more frequent. So should we be designing, where we've got our offices, where we've got our factories, should we be checking where they are in terms of potential future flooding? Should we design our offices, for example, that have nothing of any function on the lower floor so that you can allow for flooding? These are all questions that, if climate change happens seriously and keeps getting worse than it is, these are the questions that companies are going to have to answer.
Well, and it's already, like, in the last 5 years, I would say to you, in the Toronto area, I would believe we think we're pretty resilient. We're in a great location, things of that nature. But we have a customer, within 2 years, they were flooded out twice. It's a manufacturing location. Twice. They would have never, ever thought, one, it would have happened first time because of a mass downpour. And it's thought, okay, well, that's never going to happen. It happened the next year. So these are things that people have never contemplated in the past, and now it's hitting them hard, and they have to start thinking way different.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the resilience thing, and it's not just your resilience; it's the resilience of your suppliers. What if you have a supplier that you're critically dependent upon, and they're not resilient? You could face a major outage in your business, not because of anything that's happened in your location, but because of something that's happened in their location.
And when we look at automotive, where it tends to be just-in-time delivery,
Yeah,
wow, that has a huge impact on that industry, for sure. So we really covered the gamut on that one, Lysandra.
No, that was great. So both of you have provided very great examples on that question. So to follow up, you both kind of responded on what you've seen, for instance, flooding in buildings, etc. What is the strategy for responding to the expected physical risks arising from climate change?
Okay, I'll have the first go at this. I think the first thing to realise is that most businesses do have some kind of risk management process in place, but they might not have applied that to the issues that come from climate change. And climate change risk is like any other risk. What's the probability of it happening, and what's the severity of it if it does happen? You then get a scoring on that, and then you decide, okay, what can you do to mitigate that risk? I mean, that's the simple way of looking at it. And I think what you have to do is you almost have to, sounds fun and not at the same time, you almost need to sit round a table and have a doomsday meeting and sort of going, well, what could really go wrong? What do we think could go wrong, and what do we do? Can we stop it? For example, what can we do about preventing our site flooding? And if we can't, or if we do that and it gets overwhelmed, what's then our resilience plan? What's our backup plan for running the business when that occurs? I think what it accounts to, as much as anything else, it's facing up to these issues and saying they could happen. We need to be prepared. Not any longer can you say, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's something we need to think about. I mean, I'll just throw one thing on that. If people have wondered about what risk management and everything else is about, they'll all be going, never saw a pandemic coming. Well, it's interesting, but the researchers on viruses and everything else knew a pandemic was coming. They just didn't know what it would be or when it would come. And because of the work that they were doing, there's a fascinating story about the development of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. They were already effectively working on the basis of a pandemic vaccine before it happened. And thank goodness that they were. But what I'm going to say, here's the thing, I don't think that there is a vaccine that we can develop in 12 months that's going to cure climate change. It's a much bigger problem than that.
And John, I think a lot of people are relying or thinking that there is this magic pill or this vaccine that's going to fix this, and there's not. And so picking up on John's thing is we really need to do modeling, put that modeling in front of the executive, and a multidiscipline perspective too, because it will impact from purchasing to operations. So, I know I hear this frequently, like, why do you guys keep on saying multidiscipline? Because it touches and impacts everyone. But you got to put that modeling in front of the executive, the board, because that is really important, that they all understand the impacts and they get input and direction on what can be done going forward. I'm not convinced that the boards or the executive have that awareness and understanding of this type of thing yet. So that's work that needs to be done for sure.
Again, great responses from the both of you. John, following up on your suggested doomsday meeting, in terms
Yes.
of risks and opportunities, what is a positive or negative impact of adapting to climate change and working to avoid or reduce carbon emissions on the company's business model and strategic plans?
I think that's really interesting, the way you've kicked that question back to me about the doomsday thing. The yin and yang of things, there is actually a completely opposite view that you can take, and it's to sit round that table and go, we've done the doomsday thing. Now, what's the opportunity? How can our business be a leader? How can we carve out a market space? I mean, I've joked in the past that, if we've got global warming, and I don't like the term global warming, but people have talked about it, it's going to get warmer. Well, there might be more market for ice cream. So let's get into the ice cream business. And I mean, that's just a very trivial way of looking at it. But, automotive, to keep touching back on those, it's a good reason, because automotives are quite a large chunk of the emissions that we've got. But look how they're all now looking to see what are the opportunities of becoming a zero carbon vehicle producer. So you've got to look at it that way. I think we have probably done a little too much about the doomsday and the negative side of climate change, but that comes under the survivability of your business. So if you don't do that, you've got a real problem. I do think that very often we don't have long enough term planning in any business in any area. And typically, if you go to a business development meeting or something, if they're talking long range plans, they might be talking 5 years. Climate change is making us think 10, 20, 30 years ahead. And so that is a big difference. If you've got a business model that's only good for 5 years, that means you're going to be at risk if you're looking at the bigger picture. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, we've talked about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And yet, most of the time with climate change, we talk about the threat. And I think the reason we do is because the threat is real. The threat will come to pass if we don't do something, and it could be catastrophic. So it's right. But there is a very black sense of humour that what somebody once said, that in the time of plague, undertakers make money. And I'm not suggesting that we should look at it in that light, but there's always an upside to a problem. Somebody's got a problem, somebody's got a solution. The guy with the solution is the guy who can make money.
That's called entrepreneur. In my view, I actually think you have to look for opportunities, or else your business is dead. If you don't start thinking about how to take advantage of how the market's changing, if you don't modify how things are changing, then you probably won't stay in business. That's just called business. And I think one of the issues that actually happen is that most customers don't know where to start. They don't know, what does this mean and how do I do that? And because of that, they freeze. But I agree with John. I think it's way too much focus. Yes, it's coming, it's negative, but what can we do? Because we know there's customers in the marketplace that have done this and have done this for years, and they are doing really well. And I fear the ones that actually don't even think about this, their lifespan pretty short in the next few years. We'll see this. It's a mindset change, Sandra, for sure required.
Well, to end off, as final advice, what would you say to an organization that is not taking climate change seriously?
Oh, I'm sorry,
If
we're laughing at that, but I'm going to say, I'm going to make my response to it. You're not taking climate change seriously. Are you taking business seriously?
I think you got your head in the sand and you're in big trouble. I fear for your sustainability of your business. And I know it's easy for us to say because where we're in, but I just think there's realities that your customers are going to demand that you take action. Your employees are not going to stay with you unless you actually do something about it. Sandra, you mentioned, different demographics. Employees want to be with a company that actually cares and acts. And if you don't, then I don't think you're going to have a company.
I think your point and the generational thing is that, as a company, there's been, I'm not going to say endless, but there's been a number of surveys have said, what are young graduates looking for with an employer? And they want an employer with a corporate conscience. They want an employer that is going to do good, not do evil. They also probably want an employer that's going to pay them a lot of money. But then that hasn't changed over the generations. We joke about it because we've become involved in it. I think at the early days of all of this, there could have been a justifiable fear of not wanting to be an early adopter and perhaps getting it wrong and doing the wrong thing. But I think there's been enough adoption now that you can follow a proven pathway, that your risks in doing something about this are far, far less. Equally, the opportunities to be streaking ahead as a leader are less, but you need to do it now.
And let's just pick up because this is our impression. I want to come back to, your experience, your discipline. Lysandra, what's your take? Like, what are you looking for in a company that you want to work with? How important?
Yeah, I mean, being in the manufacturing industry for a bit, if you're not taking climate change seriously, you're going to get dropped. Big OEMs are looking for suppliers that are already doing that. If you don't do it, somebody else will. So I think that it's a great culture shift that, all these workplaces have had, is that if you're not taking climate change seriously, you're probably not getting a seat with the big guys anymore. And I think that's probably the best adaptation that's happened so far. I mean, we're still a long ways to go, but to me, that's probably the biggest key that I've seen is a lot of these companies that are big, big automotive companies, big food processing companies, they've already made that change. So if you don't get a seat at the table.
Fair enough.
Okay, well, we just ended it off on a very serious note. So to conclude this week's episode, thank you both for showing up today. I look forward to talking to you next week.
Thank you. It's been interesting.
That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360 Energy Inc. Tune into our podcast on Apple Music and Spotify by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. See you next week.